Michael David Murphy here with Atlanta Celebrates Photography, and we're talking today with Jim Lo Scalzo. Did I get that name right?
You got it right.
Thanks for joining us today, Jim. We reached out because we saw a particular image of yours that I'll pull up on our screen in a bit that you made on Wednesday at the Capitol. And I'm curious, I just have a lot of questions about it, and I'm just curious, you as a working photojournalist, kind of how did you arrive to be covering the protest, riot, insurrection, whatever, fill in the blank on Wednesday? How did you kind of arrive to it?
So I was there, I work for European Press Photo Agency, and I was there for the election certification of Joe Biden as the 47th president. So they were supposed to begin that process earlier in the day, and it was going to go about 20 hours because of the objections from several Republican senators and congressmen. So I photographed that in the morning, and the joint session of Congress broke because there was an objection for Arizona, so that two joint bodies had to go to their respective chambers and start debating their objection to Arizona being certified for Joe Biden. In that time, I was outside of the Senate chamber when I heard a racket one floor below me. So I ran down there and I saw maybe 20 guys that looked like extras from a Mad Max movie. They were, they had fur and horns and tattoos and everything. And I thought, I was just really surprised that, how did these guys get in here? And I thought that would be actually the culmination of the day, that, wow, some protesters actually got into the Capitol somehow. So I worked that scene for some time. That was the one image that you were talking about, the guy with the Confederate flag that was made there.
Yeah. I'm going to I'll pull it up right now while you're talking.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah, feel free.
So I photographed them for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Then they started going in different directions. I followed one crew down to the basement, and then it came back up, and all of a sudden the place just erupted. There were people coming out of every hallway. They were coming through windows. They were smashing through doors. I told somebody yesterday, it reminded me of a zombie movie. I saw people then in the rotunda of the Capitol, and so I ran there, and there were hundreds running riot and taking things and hanging from statues, and they seemed as amazed that they were in there as I did.
Mm-hmm. So you kind of had an experience of a reversal in the day. You started out the day just kind of covering business as usual, as much as it can be in this day and age. Inside the building, people started coming in, and then you kind of eventually, did you exit the building at some point to kind of continue photographing outside?
No, I definitely did not want to exit, because I knew once I was out, I wasn't getting back in. So, I photographed in the rotunda for some time. I went then to the House chamber, where there were maybe, at least 100 people banging on the door trying to get in. And I thought, okay, this is going to happen. They're going to get in there, and I was just going to go in there with them. I realized afterwards why they didn't get in, because on the opposite side of the door, there were some plainclothes officers with guns drawn, pointed at them.
Sure.
I'm sure you've seen those pictures by my colleagues, Andy Harnick and Scott Applewhite.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't realize, I was sort of surprised that they weren't pushing through the door. I then went back and I went into Nancy Pelosi's office, where some people were looting it and, making videos of themselves there. And then I tried to get back to the Senate floor or Senate side, and everything was barricaded by that point. So it was very difficult to move. Myself and a colleague went up to the third floor, and by that point, SWAT teams were already trying to secure the area. And that's when it became a little more hairy, actually, because I was concerned about, we were concerned about accidentally getting shot by one of the SWAT teams, because it's a labyrinth up there, and to just move around. We startled one crew, and they screamed at us to get on the ground and pointed their guns at us. And then when we told them that we were staff, we're photojournalists, They let us go, but they're like, we're clearing this place, and there was nowhere to go. So we found an office that locked from the inside, and at that point barricaded ourselves in to wait until the SWAT teams had finished securing so that we could try to move again and not
Wow.
startle them.
So you mentioned working alongside with someone. You, as a staff photojournalist, you're wearing a credential of some sort. I imagine that you're able to that allows you to move around. In this New York Times piece this morning, Erin Schaff, this photojournalist, was mentioning that they took it from her and smashed her cameras. Were people threatening to you because you were identified as a member of the media or staff?
Yes, and in fact, we ran into Erin there, and we came upon her on the third floor, and a team of police had her on the ground face down, and we told them immediately she's a journalist because she had her credential taken. So then we made sure that at that point that she stayed with us because she couldn't get around. Unfortunately, it was very sad what happened to Erin. It happened to AP photographer John Machillo outside as well. He was assaulted. I was concerned about my gear. I mean, they were, most of the fascists who broke in were distracted by the fact that they were in there, I think.
Sure.
And I think that's perhaps why there weren't more assaults. I mean, there was, the worst I endured was pushing and shoving and some very large woman trying to take my credential off my neck. So I was lucky. I think the objective in those scenarios is to always keep moving. And I think the combination of that and everybody being so amazed that they actually got in was enough to quell any more violence.
Have you had experience as a photojournalist in other countries that are suffering kind of governmental upheaval? Have you ever been in a situation similar to this?
Sure, I covered Iraq and Afghanistan and Kashmir and Haiti and a lot of other places where things are tense. In fact, it kind of reminded me when I went in Pelosi's office of Iraqis going into the Saddam's palaces after the Americans went through. Though in this case, there was a lot less looting. I mean, I was actually kind of surprised that they didn't trash the place more.
Yeah. Jim Borg from Reuters, maybe this morning, said he heard 3 different rioters saying they wanted to find Pence and hang him from a tree outside. Did you hear people kind of talking about what they were planning or trying or thinking of at least?
Yes, I heard people screaming about, I remember one guy screaming to try and round up the media. I did, in Pelosi's office, I think people were actually surprised that it was her office. They didn't realize it because somebody had already taken the plaque that's above
Right.
her door and paraded it outside. So the people that I saw going through it were rummaging around and only realized once they were inside where they were. That area of the Capitol is a labyrinth. It's very hard to figure out where to go. And I think they just bumbled on it.
Wow. Back to the scene, I'll pull it up again. There were other photographers who have kind of variations of the scene of either the Confederate flag man in the next room or walking through that doorway, or of this the man with the pelts who's been identified standing, and there's even an interview with him that I've seen on YouTube.
Oh.
How long did you stay at this in this particular scene? Were there frames at the head and tail of it, or did
Yes.
you just arrive here? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I tried to work it for some time because I thought that this would be the culmination of the day. These were the first 20 who came into the Capitol. And like I said, I was very surprised that they had gotten in, and I thought, okay, we want to work the scene a little bit because this has actually happened. I'm really surprised by it. It was only after that, after a few more minutes, that I realized that this was actually only the beginning, not the culmination.
There's maybe as a photojournalist, I'm curious as to how you think about this, where you will see things that happen in reality that feel like a kind of fiction, maybe a surreality that maybe even a fine art photographer would spend a lot of time trying to create. This picture has some of those elements, I think, and I'm curious as to how it felt to you in that moment.
There were 2 things going on. There was a crowd yelling at this point to my right, and there were these guys, which was a much more quiet moment. So I think whenever you pursue a quiet moment, you have to add something aesthetically interesting to make it more palatable, particularly in a time like this where it's very tense and people are screaming, and other images have a lot of energy. As you know, you saw
Sure.
my colleagues in House Chamber. I mean, those are the ones that, in my opinion, those are the best photographs that have ever come off of Capitol Hill.
It's amazing to think about just Wednesday as being this day in which all this incredible material was generated photographically. I mean, there's a whole host of other issues going on. Um, how does an event like yesterday kind of work into your career or thinking about what you've done as a photojournalist? I went onto your site, jimloscalzo.com, saw a great multimedia piece on the Dalton Highway, a place that has a soft spot in my heart.
Oh,
You've
good.
been all over the world. How does this kind of fit in? I know it's early to make a judgment on it, but how does it feel? How does it fit?
It was certainly one of the most intense, hours of my life. I mean, it was actually very quick. I went back and looked at the timestamps, and it was about 50 minutes from beginning to end. So
Yeah,
it didn't last very long. And it was certainly an intense time, and a time that I'm trying to review everything I did and wonder what I should have done differently. But you know what? Ultimately, I would much prefer to be out in the middle of Alaska,
right.
somewhere where I was the only person and only photographer around and doing something on the environment or an entirely different story. You know, DC has become a toxic place, and unfortunately, the you know it drives the news of the rest of the country and perhaps even the world. So these other stories that you want to pursue, they get pushed aside. Particularly environmental stories are the first ones that have to go when you're covering issues like this. I'll certainly be glad when Trump is gone and Biden comes in, that perhaps it'll be a little more boring and we'll have more opportunities to pursue some of these other stories.
Makes sense. Was there, we talked a little bit about this earlier, but was there a moment where you felt as a photographer for your own safety? Like where you said, I got to retreat here. I'm thinking about photographers who might be new, who will be making those own
Right.
decisions for themselves. Was there a moment like that where you made a
There were,
decision?
yeah, there were two moments. One was I was in the rotunda and people were coming through the door, and that's when the woman tried to grab my credential and she started screaming, "Hey, he's media." And I immediately moved out, and rather than to continue to work the scene, it just wasn't worth it. Even though it was actually a photogenic moment, I would have liked to have stayed there, but I was, I was very concerned about losing my gear. I wasn't concerned about being killed or assaulted. It was mostly the gear being taken.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other time was when we were on the third floor and the SWAT teams are coming through. Like I said, at that point, we were barricaded in. There wasn't very much movement. We couldn't go anywhere anyway. So it seemed to me the best thing to sit this out at this point, because SWAT teams were already clearing the building. We'd already startled one group and they came at us with guns. So it seemed, let's get out of their way. Let's let them clear it. And in fact, when we did that, we stayed in the room for about a half hour. And then another police crew came through. Same exact thing happened. They came banging on the door. We told them we were in there. They thought, that we were rioters. And I finally unlocked the door and they came in with their guns pointed at us. But there was one of them that was very helpful, and he was able to squire us back to our offices on the Senate side. So I think in all these situations, you have to weigh when to stop working. And I think there were two for me.
Did you end up staying there through the night and covering the votes once they came back?
Right. So I didn't get out of there until 4 a.m. So right. They, what happened was very interesting. The senators evacuated to the Hart building on the Senate side. And there they reconvened in secret.
Yeah.
We were there, but we were told to keep it off the record that this was happening.
Sure.
Same thing was happening on the House side in Longworth. Then both the Senate and the House decided, you know what, we need to come together and do this, finish this to show that, they're not going to stop us. So then we went back into the Capitol, and joint session started up again, and we finished, yeah, I think about 4 a.m.
From being somebody who's worked in that building so much, coming back into it and seeing the aftermath, was there anything, was it shocking, or just what did you see that struck you?
It was very depressing. There was when I was outside the House chamber during the siege, somebody, a police officer had sprayed tear gas, and that tear gas had made its way all the way around the House chamber. And so it was all over the floor. There were extinguishers everywhere, trash, Trump hats, some smashed items, some smashed pictures. It was really depressing, and it just made me angry. It seemed that we had lost with the world whatever credibility we had left.
Yeah, it's tough to be in the State Department going to some fledgling democracy right now and talking about corruption.
Yeah, right.
um, Jim, I totally appreciate your time. I don't want to take too much of it, and I just wanted to thank you and just see if there's anything else you wanted to leave us with.
No, I think that's it. I mean, one thing that did strike me afterwards is that I heard all these pundits talking about how this is not America. And I believe it is an objective fact to say, you know what? Indeed it is. We are a land of disaffected conspiracy theorists. We are a country of mass delusion. And I don't think any amount of politicking or outreach is going to, convert these millions who have a casual relationship with reality. That's just the truth.
Really, thank you for your time and for your comments, Jim. For more information, please see acpinfo.org. We are a photography festival here in Atlanta that takes place every October, and we've gone very digital in the last 10 months. Thank you for tuning in, and please subscribe to this channel. Thanks.